It was pretty full on, wasn't it?
Parliamentary debate. We have got a plan.
I think that turns people off.
It's only 2 pages.
All that try-hard bully boy stuff.
It has to decide.
There's nothing on it.
Obviously, with a lot at stake, the emotions took over, and really, some of the message got lost.
That's not right, Scott.
It was a pretty spirited debate. I'm sure everybody will agree. These are passionate topics.
Scott Morrison didn't have anything to say except shouting.
You have supported it in the past.
Through Anthony, and that's the problem.
Last night's shouting match was so bad, the Greens want to head to that other shouty place to introduce legislation ensuring future debates are reined in by an independent debate commission.
The way it is at the moment is a farce. There must be a better solution.
Excuse me.
Shut up, just shut up, shut up.
Today, Albanese was kept on his toes by this one. The opposition leader visiting his old high school to announce a plan to lure high achievers into the teaching profession.
Offering 5,000 achieving students up to $12,000 a year to study an initial teacher education degree.
While the Prime Minister today announced 40 new helicopters to boost Australia's defence capabilities.
This is around a $2.5 billion investment.
But some voters have heard quite enough, hitting the early voting stations which opened today.
The reason I'm voting early is because I absolutely cannot wait to get rid of Scott Morrison, and I want to do it on the very first day that I can.
You know, just getting ahead of the rush, getting it done. You know, I know who I'm voting for. I've made up my mind a long time ago.
At this stage, more votes appear likely to go Albanese's way, Labor extending its lead in the latest Ipsos and News polls. The two polls split on who leads as preferred PM.
I think Australians saw last time that polls can be terribly wrong.
Ignore the polls, treat them with suspicion.
Who's really ahead is still anyone's guess as the leaders battle for clear air and the election ends.
You allowed it to happen.
No, we didn't. This is a very important point. This is a very important point.
Labor's Tanya Plibersek and the Liberals and Ruston join us. Obviously, you're all across this debate. Are you embarrassed by the shouty display during last night's broadcast? That question is for both of you, but let's start with you, Tanya.
Well, I think Anthony turned up to the debate with plans for the nation, and Scott Morrison turned up with a bunch of excuses. And what people are telling me everywhere I go is they want a government that's got a plan to bring down the cost of living and support stronger wages growth. And that's what Anthony was talking about last night. It did get a bit willing, I guess, but you know, people do feel strongly about these issues, and I think Anthony made a very strong case for change last night, change that would take some of the pressure off Australian families. Most people feel like they're worse off today than they were 3 years ago. There's only a change of government will sort that out.
Sorry, Tanya, we can't hear you over the rain. You might have to shout. And just on the tone of it, this was a pretty unedifying spectacle, wasn't it? Do you think voters really would have gotten anything from watching that?
Well, I mean, look, certainly there was no doubt that it was a very passionate debate last night, but I mean, they're very important issues that are before the Australian public at the moment, and I imagine that was a reflection of that. But, you know, the takeout message that I took from last night, you know, which is completely different to the one that Tanya took out, and that was, I didn't think Anthony Albanese was across his brief. I didn't think he understood the underlying basis of the policies that he's announced. You know, he didn't seem to be able to answer the questions around things about, you know, his energy network upgrade, you know, what the impact that would be on household bills. He didn't seem to understand what would happen if somebody got a pay rise under his housing policy, what would happen to their housing plan. Would they have to increase their mortgage? Would they have to sell their house? So my take out of it last night was that there was once again very little detail from the Labor leader around what the policies that they've put to the Australian public actually mean, how they're going to be delivered, how they're going to be paid for. And I think that Scott Morrison rightly questioned Mr Albanese about some of those details, and once again he came up wanting.
It is frankly astonishing that you drew different conclusions from that debate. Tanya, one of the issues that I do think is worth asking about is wages, because your side has been, you know, really talking a lot about wage growth, and yet last night Anthony Albanese conceded that he couldn't promise that real wages would grow if you leave government. Doesn't that really leave Labor's attacks on the topic a little bit disingenuous?
Not at all. We know that wages growth will be stronger under Labor because the Liberals actually want to keep wages low. They've got ministers out there saying that low wages are a deliberate design feature of our economic architecture. They've argued against pay increases. They've voted against protecting penalty rates. They've voted against criminalising wage theft. We've got a plan to support stronger wages growth through supporting business productivity. We need to make sure our businesses are doing well. We lower their power bills, we improve their NBN access, we invest in education and training. When they're more productive, they can pass on pay rises. But we also change our industrial relations system. Now, we should criminalise wage theft in Australia.
But if that plan is so great, you should be able to make the promise. You should be able to say, yes, there will be, we promise there will be real wage growth, and yet you can't.
Well, the difference between Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese is Scott Morrison will say anything and do anything for a vote. Anthony's telling the truth to the Australian people. Wage rises will be higher under Labor governments. There is no question that wage rises will be better under Labor governments because we'll make our economy more productive so businesses can pass on growth, and we'll change our industrial relations system. We'll focus on the gender pay gap. We'll make sure that low-paid women workers in industries like aged care or industries that are predominantly female will see a wage rise. We've seen 21 attempts in the last couple of decades to see gender-based pay rises in largely female-dominated industries. Only one has been successful. We need to change the industrial relations environment to make sure that people working in aged care, in childcare, in disability, in those female-dominated industries get a pay increase.
OK, Tanya. And let's just change tack here. One of your ministerial colleagues today, Bridget McKenzie, in answer to a question, said this, and I'll quote, "What you would see as pork barrelling is what the National Party, we say, is delivering to our electorates. Shouldn't funding be based on need, not on political favours?"
Well, absolutely. A strong economy allows us to be able to deliver for our communities, and I'm sure that's what Bridget was referring to. And in the case of funding that goes to many of our rural and regional electorates, which are electorates that are held by the National Party, there are very few electorates held by anybody apart from the Liberal National Party outside of the metropolitan area. But, to actually be talking about supporting electorates. I mean, if there was a program that was before us that is a classic when it comes to political opportunism, it would have to be the Labor Party's urgency clinics. I mean, so far, I'll list you some names. Corangamite, Dunkley, Bass, Braddon, Boothby are all places that the Labor Party have said urgency clinics are going to be located. But the classic of all classics is McNamara. We know in McNamara there are 477 doctors. That's 3 times the national average, and yet they're putting planning to put an urgency clinic into McNamara. So I would suggest that it would be very difficult to be accusing us of supporting our communities because we happen to hold just about every electorate in rural and regional Australia of doing anything apart from supporting rural and regional Australia.
Last word to you, Tanya.
And your government tried to build car parks commuter car parks in places where there were no railway stations. The Treasurer tried to build one in his own electorate where there was no railway station. Car park rorts, sports rorts, that's why we need a Federal Integrity Commission, the sort of pork barrelling that you've seen from the previous government. But can I also take issue with Anne's statement that there's a strong economy? This government has borrowed more, taxed more, spent more and wasted more than any government in Australian history. And you cannot say it's a strong economy when we've got wages going backwards, the cost of living going through the roof and Australians falling behind all the time. Australians everywhere I go say life is getting harder under Scott Morrison. That is not the sign of a good economy.
Tanya, Anne, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you both for not talking over each other and for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.